Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Jeremy Webster. Jeremy is the founder of ODAAT Apparel, which he launched after he recognized a lack of clothing brands that specifically catered to the needs of individuals walking the road of recovery. With its motto of Wear Your Resilience, ODAAT is a mission-driven brand grounded in service and gratitude. All right, Jeremy, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in with just one of my standard questions, and that's how many kids do you have?
I have one kid as of right now.
And how old?
He just turned 2, actually.
Oh, man. You're in it. Yeah. Toddler land.
Yeah. You know, it's funny when you have a kid, it's, you always think things might be a little bit different, you know, and people always talk about the toddler stage. And then you finally get there and you're like, okay, yep. It's just kids have a toddler stage no matter what you do.
And when they're teenagers, it's a separate toddler stage. It's true. I realized that at one point that teenagers and toddlers are bigger versions of one another. Just they slam doors and swear more when they're teenagers, but it's that age of getting ready to launch into the next thing.
Totally. How about you? How old are your kids?
So I've got 4, 20 and 16 from my first marriage, and then 8 and 12 from my second marriage. So technically my stepkids, but they're just my kids. They're all just my kids. So I've got a broad range.
Absolutely.
And did you think you always wanted to be a dad?
No. So to be honest with you, a lot of my life, I actually did not think I wanted to be a dad. It took a really long time for me to get to a place in my life where I felt that I was capable of being a dad, if you will. For, you know, my wife and I met when we were 22 and lived in Los Angeles. And I think there was a lot of damage or, you know, just ideals I had about parenting and bringing another person into the world that I didn't necessarily want to do myself. And early on, you know, I had an inkling that maybe my drinking was too much. And I just didn't think that bringing a kid was the smartest decision. And when we were actually living in Japan and I started to confront my drinking, that's the first time that I said, okay, I could be a dad. Like this, you know, it could be something that we consider. And my wife always, you know, wanted to have kids, of course, but we were both open to waiting until later on in our lives to make that decision. And so, yeah, it's kind of a long answer, but, you know, no, I certainly never thought that I would be a dad early on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good jump off point. Are you willing to kind of share a little bit about your story and your history with drinking and, you know, when and why you made the change and how that's going for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I grew up in a household that had drinking in it. I have a parent who is a very active drinker, and from a very young age, drinking in my household was just a very normal thing. I never really looked at drinking as something that not every single person on the planet didn't do. I started drinking when I was extremely young. I mean, probably in the single digits, just because my parents would house parties, and it was always okay for us to, you know, have a sip of their beer or to have a drink at the end of the night. Never thinking anything really outside of it. So my drinking was very, very young. And throughout the years, you know, middle school and high school, I would continue to seek it, but not really think anything else about it, simply because, again, in my house, it was extremely normal for one of my parents to have drinks fairly regularly. So even when I remember in middle school, sneaking in whiskey into school, into like a sippy cup, and drinking it throughout the day, and just kind of always looking for ways to have alcohol around me. High school, same thing. A lot of, you know, a lot of parties and drinkings, but again, never thinking anything of it. So when I was in my 20s, I moved to Los Angeles, and I was always the person that was I would drink before drink before I would go out. And then when I was out, I would typically drink more than most people, at least that people that I was hanging with, but it wasn't something that I considered, again, out of the norm. I would always give myself the excuse of, well, I've had a long day. I'm working really hard. I'm where I want my life to be career wise. And so I deserve these drinks and it's normal. So I would just continually just find excuses for myself, or vice versa, start to compare myself to other people who drank more than me so that I didn't feel I had an issue with my drinking. Early on, like when we were in our 20s, my wife started to mention things like, maybe there is an issue with alcohol here. And so I started to dabble in Al-Anon meetings to see if there was something with my upbringing that perhaps led me down, my thought process in drinking. But again, never really looking at it as anything that abnormal. So I never really considered myself, an alcoholic or someone who really had a drinking problem. My drinking really started to come to a head. My wife and I decided to leave Los Angeles after living there for 12 or 13 years. And we did some traveling. We traveled around the globe for about 6 months and then moved to Japan shortly after. And during this whole trip, I started to finally confront okay, I can't go a single day without drinking. And I'm starting to really, really need drinking. So when we had lived in Japan, I'm trying to do the shortest version possible for you. But when we had lived in Japan, I said, okay, I think I do have a problem with drinking. So I'm going to go, I'm going to read some self-help books. I read some books like Alan Carr's How to Quit Drinking. And then This Naked Mind, I forget the author of that. And at the end of those books, I said, great, I'm cured. So I'm not going to drink anymore. And during that time, I had taken 3 months off of drinking. And everything felt great. I would guess it was in a pink cloud, if you would. I felt really good. I felt that I never needed to drink again. But then at the end of the 3 months, I said, well, wait a minute. I just went 3 months without drinking. This is obviously not a problem. So what better way to celebrate than buying a drink? So this is where my alcoholism really started to take over my life, was at that moment when I told myself, okay, I went 3 months by myself. And now I deserve a drink because I'm not an alcoholic and I can prove it to myself. I went into this almost my whole mind shift everything kind of shifted in my life, where I started to drink again. I had bought a really nice bottle of whiskey and I was like, I'm going to sip this for the next month because I'm not an alcoholic. So I know that I can buy this whiskey and I can just sip it and enjoy it like, a real man would. And within probably a day and a half, that entire bottle was gone. And I started to realize at that point, wow, I actually do have a problem with this. So this is the point in my life where my drinking started to really shift, is where, because I started to build shame around it and a little bit of guilt, is the first time in my life I started hiding it and not letting on to people know how much I was drinking. And so I had gone through a 10-day period of drinking fairly significantly. And, after that 10 days, I told my wife, okay, I can't obviously do this. So I need to quit drinking. So again, I went through another few month period without drinking. But then because I had built up this idea of my understanding that I do have a problem, I started to drink again, but I didn't tell anyone about it. So I started to, sneak drinks and, started to go through a what I like to call maintenance drinking, where I was kind of having a little bit for 24 hours constantly. And so I started building up really bad withdrawals and starting to have my first signs of, failure within my body, because I just wasn't processing it the same. And I went a few months like that. Again, came out to my wife saying, okay, I've been lying. I'm sorry. I have been drinking, have been telling anyone. I really don't know what to do, and had started to go to AA when we were still living in, this is while we were still living in Japan. And so I had gotten a sponsor and I got sober while we were living there. I was joined an expat community. It was 5 or 6 expats in Japan who attended an English speaking AA meeting. And I had some good sobriety. And we eventually moved back to the US because we were at the point now where okay, we're going to start a family. We've been away from all of our families too much. My family is all over the country. So moving near my family, especially my family member that drinks a lot, wasn't an option. So we decided to move to Connecticut, where I am now, and so that we could start our own family and have the support that we needed, because it really does take a village. And at this time, I was sober, but I really started to build a resentment for living where we lived. It wasn't Los Angeles. It wasn't any place I was familiar with. I had no community here. I started to resent all the meetings that I was going to here. And, then my wife got pregnant. And long story short is that during this time I relapsed because that voice in my head told me I could have just one more drink, or I could just have one. And it really, because I kind of got away from my program and got away from any spirituality or anything within my life, I convinced myself I could have just one drink. And that started 9 months of like my own personal hell. 9 months, 10 months, 8 months. I'm not really sure what it was, but it was the same kind of thing. I was lying about my drinking. Everyone that knew me believed I was sober. I was not. I was hiding drinks around where I lived. I was, drinking every day and then stopping for a week and going through withdrawal, and then coming in thinking that was going to be the last time ever, and then drinking again. And, it was really interesting because when my wife had gotten pregnant, I kept setting these gates in my head. Like, okay, when she's 3 months into the pregnancy, that's when I'm going to stop drinking. And then that will just be my little secret. And then when it's 6 months in the pregnancy, that will just be my thing, and I'll quit drinking. And I kept trying this and failing and going through withdrawals and just an absolute nightmare. So my final gate was, okay, when my wife has our son, that will be my final drink, and that will be great. And, luckily I was able to stay sober through my wife's birth and through all of that. But keep in mind, during this whole time, like, life at home was an absolute mess. I was unbearable to live with. I was a complete asshole, honestly. Just really an unbearable person, because I was extremely unhappy. And honestly, I was really, really scared because my withdrawals were getting so bad that I didn't know how I was going to continue. So my wife had our beautiful baby boy, and I was able to stay sober for a few days, but then again, immediately went back out, and I lived with my wife and my son for about 3 months, and our relationship just deteriorated beyond belief. And so everything kind of came to a head where everyone at this point knew, like, something's wrong with Jeremy. He's extremely unhealthy. He's extremely, not himself. People thought I was maybe using drugs and so on and so forth. And so it got to a place where me and myself, I was so miserable that, like, I was at the first time in my life, it's like, I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live anymore. And nothing in my life, no outside person, no child, no wife, no family could get me out of this cycle. So I was lucky that I had some family members visit me because they wanted to meet my new son. And then they saw the absolute mess that I was in. And I went to lunch with some family members, my sister and my mom, and apparently started having seizures at the lunch. I don't really remember. So they called an ambulance. And then from there, I went, basically, long stories, I went straight into rehab. And that's where my sobriety date is the day after, when I finally got a bed in a rehab, which was, July 27th, 2022. So yeah. So at this point, I had, they sent me to the ER, to try to, make sure that I wasn't going to die. My blood level was extremely, extremely high. And the next morning, I got a bed at a rehab in Connecticut here. And it was really interesting during this whole process. Like, while I was in rehab, there was a family wedding that I was supposed to go to that, I obviously didn't. But it was funny because when I was in rehab, I was so in denial about my situation and how bad everything was that, like, I thought I could leave early and, like, I was still going to make the wedding and do all of these things, and just life was going to go back to normal. And, that wasn't the case. My, my family was obviously very upset with me for, a multitude of reasons. And, the reality of the situation just didn't set in yet. I guess, I still, my mind was so warped in this alcoholic craze that I had been in for so long that I didn't like, even the fact that I wanted to like no longer live, just nothing really resonated with how much effect I had on other people.
Right. Seizures in the restaurant. Like everybody does that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like it's, okay, you drank too much. I'm sorry, I had a seizure. Yeah, that's, maybe that's normal and so on. Maybe not. But
it's Tuesday, it's seizure day at the restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was in rehab, the realization of the situation started to really hit. And my wife and I, again, because at this point we have a 3-month-old son who, I was not there for. I couldn't respectfully say I was there for my wife or my son in any respect at all. So from there, I was notified that I'd be, not coming back home after rehab. So I went into sober living for 3 months in Hartford, which is a town here in Connecticut. And that's where I guess my sobriety journey this time really started to take hold. As soon as I got in the sober house, I got a really good sponsor and I started doing a lot of meetings and slowly rebuilding the relationship with my wife and rebuilding that trust with her. And, during this time as well is where I decided to start the apparel brand, ODAAT Apparel. I was looking at, I had no clothes in rehab or from rehab or in the sober living. Even my pillow, I just put like an old t-shirt over because I didn't have any sheets. And I was like, oh, I need some clothes. And I was like, I wonder if there's any sobriety clothes or any like, recovery clothes, something just that I can wear every day that helps remind me of the journey that I'm on and the man I'm trying to become. And as I was doing that research, I found a lot of, like print on demand, just like, a lot of like the same slogans over and over and over. And it's not something that I really wanted to wear myself. So that's where I kind of found the idea of creating a more premium and, long lasting apparel line that was more subtle and more something that I would actually want to wear, something with minimal colors, a lot of muted tones and things that I could wear every day, but wouldn't necessarily scream like, hey, everyone, I'm sober and I'm trying to, fix everything I've messed up in my life, but more so just like little conversation starters that other people who have maybe gone through the same or similar journey would be able to, have a conversation over. And so it took a long time to rebuild my relationship. My wife and I are still together. We are better than ever, honestly, because I think there was like almost a death of our old selves. When we've been together now for 15 years. And at that time we were together for, about 12, 13 years. And we really, I killed the idea of who she married and because of everything that I was putting her through. And she also spent time to kind of, re-find herself in this. And we weren't sure if we were going to make it through it. And so we started to look at ourselves as like more individual people. And, luckily for us, we were able to take that and come back together stronger. And I'm grateful for that. And, now I have a awesome relationship with my son. He's 2, as I mentioned. And, I've been able to be there as a full present, sober dad for the last almost 2 years now. And it's been the biggest gift I can give my son and, myself, of course. So yeah, that's kind of the full journey of my sobriety. And for the last year, I launched this apparel brand on my 1-year sobriety anniversary because, as we say, don't do anything crazy in your first year. And so I kind of wanted to give myself time to really do the right research and space to see if this is something I want to pursue, particularly because my background is not in fashion. I've never been in fashion in my whole life. This is a whole new adventure for me. So.
Yeah, is that your full-time gig, or is it? It your is right now. Hustle?
Yeah, my background is in branding. I've done a lot of like corporate branding for a very long time. When I was in Los Angeles, I worked at a branding agency, and then when I had started to travel and moved abroad, I had a business that I started with someone I used to work with at the old agency, and we had a branding agency. And actually, just about a month ago, I dissolved my half of that agency to focus on this now full time. For a while, I was doing kind of both. And, luckily, this has allowed me to be in a place where I can focus on it full time. So,
Yeah, and there's a cool flexibility to that as a parent for sure. To be the master of your own time. I mean, I fit
100%.
this in and around, right? We're like, it's Sunday at 9, right? Like,
yeah.
I fit it in where I can, and because I love it and I think it's important, and but being able to sort of do it full time is cool for you.
It's very awesome. And I mean, in terms of time, I'm extremely grateful for it. And, I have utmost respect for everyone who, is either a single parent or who has to work full time, because I mean, right now, even being able to do this full time, managing my time is extremely difficult. I wake up at 5:45 in the morning every single day so I can go into the gym, do the gym, get home by 7 a.m. so I can wake up my son and spend an hour or two with my son and my wife. And then from there, I usually come to the office for a few hours, catch up on orders that came in from the night previously. And then I'll usually go back home after his nap time to spend some more time with him, and then come back to the office. And then, if I can, go back home and put him back down to bed, and then come back to the office, or go to a meeting and come back to the office. Or like tonight, I was coming back from a meeting, for this. And so, I'm extremely, extremely grateful for the flexibility I have, because even right now, it just feels like there's not enough time in the day. And, because there's just so much to see and witness with the child. But I'm very, very lucky, and very grateful.
Yeah, I have a phrase I use at work. So I do marketing for an architecture firm in New York with 3 offices, and I will frequently say to the owners, the physics of time is real. Like
yeah.
I can try and do everything, but there's some give in there, right? Like, okay, we can put out another proposal, but I'm not, I'm already working over 40 hours. I'm not working this weekend. I'm not doing it. And it's a privilege to be able to say that. And I'm like, so we can do the one more thing, but the physics of time is real. So that time is going to have to come from somewhere else. And, they seem pretty good with hearing that. They might always like it, but that's also sort of mature Stephen, a lot of sobriety and work under my belt to be able to say that. There's a time when I was a single parent where I was so afraid, like if I lost my job, there's no other income behind me. And it was just, I operated in this kind of sphere of fear. Like, oh my God, like if I lose my job, what am I going to do? So I'm just going to do everything. I'm not going to be true to myself. I'm going to just hustle all the time. And it's just not healthy.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very well put. And I think that there is something about having time, especially within sobriety, at least for people like us, where there's so much growth that comes out of that and allows you to have those conversations and insight, and that's one reason why I decided to close my portion of the branding agency, because one, like, as you just mentioned, staying true to yourself. I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm grateful for the time that I had in it, but it's not something that I was, really passionate about. And, the brand, to be completely transparent, the brand is very new. I mean, it's only 9 months old, and, it still is an everyday, hustle and trying to, push. I'd never been on social in my entire life. I'm 37. I was never on social media my whole life. I had no Instagram, no anything. And now that I started this brand, I'm on everything. And so trying to balance, creating social as well as actually, producing all the garments myself. I still embroider and print everything myself. I wanted to be able to put my time and energy into something I'm passionate about. And it's been incredible. Over the holidays last year, around Christmas, we have like a gift card on our website, and they always can include a note to who they're giving the gift card for. And this was like the turning point for me realizing I'm doing something that I'm passionate about and has purpose, because people started buying gift cards for their loved ones or their dads or their moms or their brothers or their sisters or their kids, saying things like, "We are so proud of you. Keep going. we love you. And it brings me almost to tears to think about it, because just to have that type of impact is exactly what I wanted the brand to do. I wanted, if you have one of our shirts or sweatshirts or whatever it is, that, not just is it just something you're going to buy and, maybe it is just something you buy because you're like, hey, it looks cool and so on. But my goal for it really is that, even for myself, when I put it on, I'm wearing one of our ODAAT signature hoodies right now that has like a puff embroidered ODAAT logo on the front. And when I put it on, I really do tell myself, like, I have just today. Like, I only have today and I can do it. And there's nothing else matters. I don't have to worry about tomorrow. I don't have to worry about yesterday. And that was my goal. And so to be able to focus my time here has been a huge gift.
Yeah, I like your motto, which is wear your resilience.
Yeah.
And it's, I've done a lot of these episodes and we talk a lot about things, service, community, but resilience, interestingly, hasn't come up a lot. And I think, it definitely connects to parenting, right? Because we're trying to teach our kids to be resilient in whatever way is appropriate for their age. But in like getting sober and staying sober, and frankly, just like living in America in 2024 requires a high level of resilience. And I think it's a simple motto and a brilliant motto, but it's just a reminder of like this thing you have to do every day is like remind yourself, like, I'm strong, I'm resilient, I can get through this day. People love me, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. We, early on, I was playing with a few different, ideas around the brand and just thinking about what I wanted the brand to represent. And of course, I'm sober, and I only founded this company because I am sober, and through the gifts of sobriety, have been able to do it. But so much of my sobriety is in staying resilient. So much of being a good dad is staying resilient. So much of showing up as a good husband, as a good father, as a good friend is, my resilience throughout the day. And so like we have a shirt that says, calm in the chaos. And what inspired a lot of that was parenting, and life gets very chaotic. And although, yes, I am sober, I want to be able to speak to people that are not just that are just finding sobriety. Not everyone needs to find sobriety, but a lot of people are going through very challenging, difficult times in their life. And I still think that our, ODAAT, standing for one day at a time, really holds true for so many people in so many ways. And yeah, so that's where that came from. But thank you.
It definitely one day at a time as a parent too, because boy, sometimes kids are just surly. Or sometimes as an adult, you had a bad day at work and you got to figure out how to shake that loose before you go home because, and this is super cheesy. It was like Maya Angelou on Oprah or something a zillion years ago. I don't even know how I saw this, but Maya Angelou was like, your kids should always see you smile at them. Like that's the first thing they should see in the morning is you smiling at them. And, when you're trying to get a 16-year-old out the door for school, it can be somewhat difficult sometimes to feel smiley when everybody's tired and grumpy and you're like trying to get them there on time and trying to get yourself to work on time. And, but it's a good reminder. And I think it's a reminder, like life is so precious.
Yeah.
And like having kids and being like called dad, to me, like being called dad is probably the greatest honor you could possibly have, and I truly believe it's an earned title, not a given title.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more. And one thing I was actually talking to someone about earlier today was changing the perspective of, I think in parenting and in life overall, you think about like, oh, I have to do this, right? I have to, whatever, get dinner ready for my 2-year-old or whatever it might be. But changing the perspective to, I get to do this, and understanding how precious life is. I forget what the absurd statistic is on the chance of us all being here right now, but you really do only get to live one time, depending on how you look at life and philosophy and things like that. But I'm here right now, and the chance is I never will be again, especially within the context of today. Like today is never going to be the same. And if I look at and approach every single day as only having today, then I'll do everything the best to my ability that I can for that day, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. People die all the time, not to bring it to a sad place, but people die all the time, whether that's from drinking or addiction or, car accidents or a random stroke or who knows, but tomorrow is not guaranteed and today is. And so I really try to hold true that like, I need to do the very best I can and come, to show my son that I'm smiling and to be playful and to be happy with him, even if he's screaming because he doesn't want to walk from the car to our home because he wants to be carried or, whatever it is, like to approach all of that with a sense of love and understanding, because again, tomorrow's not guaranteed.
Yeah, I once worked for a guy and he had his first kid when I was working there, and he was like, man, infinite patience is like a fucking thing in parenting. Because because the next day, a 2-year-old's going to cry because you're trying to carry him and they want to walk. He's like, you can't win. Like,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking when you're talking about that,
no winning.
So most nights now, I start reading with the 8-year-old, then I read to the 12-year-old, and then the 16-year-old is here every other week. So checking in with her, and her brother's 20 and he's on his own, but he's local. So, we see him, but it's all those things with your kids. It's just a gift and a privilege. Like, yeah, some nights am I tired and do I want to read? Not always, but I do it because it's just, it's like an act of service in parenting. Like that is how you connect with your kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I've been really focusing on now too is like just making sure that I'm really present as well when I'm with my son, because I think that a lot of the time I'm thinking about business, right? So I'm just thinking about business, ways I can improve the brand. If my leads from my manufacturer are going to be on time for new launches, or if I have a new design idea that I want to implement. Like sometimes I have those in my head and I'm like, I have to write this down right now, or I have to do this, or I need to run to the office and take care of this. And my biggest thing is just really making sure that when I'm with my son, that I am 100% present with him and I'm not constantly checking my phone. And most of the time now, if I'm at home, I'll just leave my phone in the car because there's so many notifications. I'll get, distracted every 2 seconds. And so making sure that I'm really present so that when I'm with him, he knows I'm with him and I'm giving him attention. That's been really big for me, just because it's so easy to just, have your mind in a million other places.
Yeah. And there gets to be this as your kids get older and they have the stupid device as well. Yeah. There is a real thing about do as I say, not as I do, because you get off your phone. Well, how many times am I on my phone, like checking Instagram? It goes back to, I built Sober Dad Crew mostly on, on Instagram, and there's just, social media is just weird. It's just a weird world, and full of like trapdoors and echo chambers and all these things. And you definitely see it like with kids when they get on there, like watching a 12-year-old sort of get on social media for the first time, when really all the evidence and research is saying there's like no possible way you should be letting your kid do that, but all of us do.
100%.
There's just, there's dark stuff out there, but there's just, thank God no one was filming all the stuff I did when I was 14 or 15. Thank God this stupid shit is only in my memory and not forever living on the internet.
I know. I have a lot of compassion for the generation that has been growing up with cell phones, smartphones, whatever, camera phones, since the conception of their, of their childhood, because everything that I did as a child is nowhere to be found because no one had a camera to, shoot it because it was funny and throw it up on TikTok. And, yeah, I mean, it's, we live in an interesting time, but it's also, I try not to, like, obviously when my son gets to that age, there will be conversations and, I'll probably be a completely different landscape than what we have right now.
Yeah. But given the speed at which things are changing 10
Exactly.
years from now? Who even
Yeah,
knows?
maybe everyone will be in some like metaverse thing, but it's also that is the world we live in. So I'm not going to, resist it and say no to everything. I don't think. I mean, I'll talk to you when I get there, but but that's where we live. And so I think, as a parent, the best thing I can do, and as what you're saying, is leading by example. So if I'm with him, not always being on my phone doing business or checking social media, and hopefully, since they take in everything, some of that starts to translate and to seep in that, when we're with family, it's family time. And, when dad's at the office, he's taking care of business and so on.
Yeah. And I was just thinking that, as I forget what I was just thinking, that you really get like the first 3, 4, maybe 5 years is when you really, really have influence and build that relationship. So
Yeah.
then when you have a teenager, if you haven't done that stuff when they're little, if you haven't like dug in and put them first and put your phone away and made them the priority and built that relationship, when they're a teenager and starting to pull away, they're not going to magically just tell you shit. They're going to not tell you things. You're going to not have this foundation. You can't just wave the wand later
Yeah.
on and be like, oh, cool. Like now you're more mature. Like, let's talk. They're going to be like, I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's a very good point.
It was interesting. I had a conversation with someone who he had a younger kid too. And he's like, how do you navigate as a sober person, then the conversations with your kids around alcohol or drugs? Like, what do you tell them? And I think obviously alcohol is a drug, but there's some really terrible things out there in the world now with fentanyl. And I mean, it's just
Yeah.
straight up dangerous, that you don't want them to experiment with that. But alcohol still, and I guess weed now in a weird way exists in this sort of more societally, legally endorsed category. So then how do you have those conversations with your kids? Like a lot of people who, if you like raise your kid vegetarian, they might try a steak,
Yeah.
right? If
For
you have a
sure.
sober house, that doesn't mean they're not going to want to try a drink.
Yeah. And have you had a lot of those conversations already with your kids?
Yeah. I mean, with the oldest one, who's 20 now, there was a moment, and maybe he was like 11 or 12. I was like, oh, you don't like know what meth is. Like, no one's actually sat you down and even explained what these different things are. So I did that. And because I thought, like, if you don't know what these things are, if somebody offers you something, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of them have tended to do sports and been really focused. So unless I'm totally living in the dark, they don't seem to have an interest in alcohol that much. I mean, the 20-year-old will be 21 in July. He spent some time in Costa Rica where the drinking age was 18. And I think, he had some beers, and I think that's also fine. I'm not, there's people out there who can live a fine and happy life and have a beer every once in a while, and they're all good. And then there's those of us that's like, that's not our thing.
Yeah.
Which is also okay. I don't want to judge other people for their life. I want to help people if they are struggling. But I try and just, keep all those conversations open, be it alcohol or sex or whatever. As they get older, you just have to try and keep that conversation flowing.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I have talked about that a lot. And it's interesting because my wife is, a normal drinker. I mean, she'll have a half a glass of wine at dinner. Not with me anymore because, because I'm in recovery and she respects that. But, if she goes out with the girlfriends, like she can have a glass of wine, but she's the kind of person that will have literally half a glass being like, it's not making me feel the best. And then just leave it.
Yep.
And so, and like for me, that's just insanity. Like if I go to a restaurant and someone next to me is having a glass of wine and they leave half of it, I will be like, that is insane. That person is leaving that glass of wine there.
Let me help you with that.
So, yeah, exactly. 100%.
You don't want to waste that. That's a terrible thing to do.
Terrible idea to waste that. And so I think with my son, obviously there's going to come, he's still very young, but there's going to come a point in time where, he's going to know that one, the business that I'm running is, very sobriety heavy, as well as, I'm sneaking off to these secret society meetings in the middle of the night. And so we're obviously going to have conversations around that. And, I think honesty is the best policy. So, I don't know how it's going to go, but when I get there, I'll let him know, hey, your dad has a problem with alcohol or had a problem with alcohol. And, actually, I don't know. I'm trying to think now what I would say, and I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it some more.
Yeah. I mean, some of it was just the reality that you are the child of someone that struggled with alcoholic use disorder, which therefore makes you at a higher risk of that, when they're old enough. But we're really open with all the kids. Like they know our stories I guess in varying degrees, depending on their age. I mean, when I met my now wife, we were both sober. I always say that there wouldn't be an us without sobriety. Like that is foundational. Like our wedding there was no alcohol at our wedding. So it is such a fundamental part, of who we are as people and who we are as a couple and who we are as parents, that, there's no mystery to the kids, and also the older two, especially the oldest who saw me in an active drinking time, is someone I've apologized to.
Yeah.
The 16-year-old too, she was much, much younger, but right. That is part of, and I'm not an AA guy.
Sure.
I did therapy and just stopped. Side note, your story is a reminder that you can't always just quit alcohol. It could kill you to just stop. And that, medical recovery and rehab can be really important for people, even with, quote unquote, just alcohol, in some ways, particularly alcohol. But I understand in like apologizing to the people that you've hurt. Like that's an important part, not just of recovery, just of life.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Taking responsibility. And I think that's also a good note too. I'm very open that I do, attend a program, and that's something that I've needed, but I know a lot of people who have done something similar where they have, quit drinking through therapy or through self-help books. Like I try, I think there's a lot of avenues for people to get sober. There's also a lot of people that just realize that it doesn't do anything for them in their lives and decide that drinking is not for them. And I think that's awesome. My personal story is a little bit different, and I needed a program and a community to continue the conversation with on a daily basis. And so, it's been a foundation for my sobriety. But yeah, I think that's awesome that you were able to stay sober through some therapy and introspection or however you want to call it.
Sort of told the story more in here. I think I also caught myself at a time. I mean, I sort of tell this story. It felt like my grandmother was, looking down after she had died and kind of essentially tapped me on the shoulder and was like, you can't keep going that way. That way is bad. There is a very sharp edge of a cliff there with rocks at the bottom. And I kind of just turned around and walked the other way. And I think I was lucky in that, or it would have been much harder. But there weren't, that was, what was it? Is it 13 years? 14? I don't know. I'm losing track now. I shouldn't suppose, but it's been a long time since I've been sober, but there weren't these kind of resources out there that there are now. I mean, I think online, the sober community is really strong.
It is.
That's the sort of value side of social media, is finding people to connect with, even if you don't meet in person, who can share your story and share their experiences with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, one thing that I've noticed as well, starting this company is I mean, the online community is extremely strong, and it's alcohol is such an isolating thing. And you talked about like kind of getting to it before it had gotten to be too much. And I think it's really interesting when you start to talk about that, because for all of my 20s and, part of my 30s, I was in a place with alcohol where, even though it was likely, yes, a big problem, it never interfered in my life to the extent that it did at the end of my drinking. And so I think that if I had, maybe even an online community early on, that I could see start of a movement and have an open conversation discussion around it, that maybe my path wouldn't have gone to where it had been. But at the same time, I'm really grateful for how unbelievably miserable my life became, because it allowed me to get sober now. And that's all I can really look at it from. But yeah, I mean, the online community is thriving right now. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, because I think the other side of that misery when you get through it is gratitude,
100%.
right? And you are grateful to, every day waking up to your kid and your wife and, your job. And I mean, gratitude for me is so important. My grandmother, it's the same grandmother, always talked about being greatly blessed. I like have that tattooed on my arm. And,
Mm.
this was, I'm a little older than you. So my grandparents, my grandfather served in World War II. So my grandmother just had my mom and her two sisters while my grandfather was in the Navy during World War II. And even then, and even when everything was hard and on the hardest days, to remember that you're greatly blessed, to me is just the sort of if I have a little mission statement, don't be a dick is also a good mission statement, but you know
100%.
remember your gratitude and your blessings every day.
I think gratitude is honestly like number one pillar for life. I mean, gratitude to me, I mean, it is truly everything in leading a good life, is to be grateful. I tell sometimes when I'm speaking about my story, I tell about my time moving back to the town that I live in. It's this little seaside place called Mystic in Connecticut. And
The
when we
pizza, the
first moved,
movie.
yes, that is directly across from where I live. But when we when we had moved here, I was so resentful at the fact that we were in this small town where I knew no one, and I was in so much physical and mental pain from my relapse that I was going through, that everything just seemed miserable, right? Like the sun, I didn't like the sun. The ocean, I didn't like it. If the birds were singing, I didn't hear them. Like everything just felt very, very dark. And so before I had moved, when I was moving out of the sober house back to this town, I was nervous, right? Because this town had so many negative emotions tied to the past, year for myself. And it was something really incredible had happened when I moved back. Was I was grateful for everything in this town. Like I remember walking downtown for the first time and just being like, wow, it's very safe here, because when I was on my sober house, like I heard gunshots a lot. So it was not very safe. And I was like, wow, I live in a very safe community. And then, wow, the ocean actually smells wonderful and there are birds chirping and that's a beautiful thing. And all of a sudden, all these little subtle nuances that I completely missed on my day to day when I was drinking came to life. And I just had so much gratitude for the place I live in now, that it's shifted my entire perspective on my current life and where I am in my life. So I think gratitude is something that everyone should practice and be really present in, because it makes everything in life just so much easier.
Yeah, and it just occurred to me, and I was thinking about this earlier when you talked about resentment, because I think like resentment is a toxin or a poison, and gratitude's the antidote.
Yeah.
And I remember, I grew up in Maine and my folks are still there. And I remember when, I split from my two older kids' mom, and I was just like living in Ithaca, New York, and I was like, I don't want to be here. Like, this isn't where I want to live. And I thought, well, this is where your kids are, and this is where you'll be. So you can either be kind of pissed because the Finger Lakes in New York State, quite lovely place to live, honestly. So I can either let those resentments build up, or I can accept that I live where my kids are and I would never live anywhere else, and embrace all that is good
Yeah.
and all that I have that is good that I should be grateful for. But I think, and it's bigger than just yourself. Like, I think we live in a world right now, in a country right now, that just resentments are so huge. It's just fueling this difficult time. Is that, and people play up on those, right? That's how you get people fired up, is make them resentful of that person, make them hate that person. And it is just really a poison. And I don't know how to like share the antidote of gratitude widely other than conversations like this. But if everybody could really like remember what they should be grateful for or what their privilege is. And of course, not everybody has that same level, but it just feels like such an important message.
Yeah, I agree. And not everyone has the same level or same gift in terms of what to be grateful for. But in today's world, especially everyone who lives in America, like we can truly make any life that we want out of the life that we have. And I think perspective is huge. And if we don't have gratitude for what we have, then when we get more or get something different in our life, gratitude is not going to magically appear for those situations either. So finding gratitude in what we have today, helps build whatever it is that you're seeking, and will bring gratitude into those situations as well, I believe.
Yeah, I think that is an awesome note to stop on, but I also want to give you an opportunity to tell the people how they can get your apparel.
All of our apparel is sold through our website. Our website is ODAATapparel.com, and that's ODAAT apparel.com. You can find us on most socials right now. All of our handles are at ODAAT Apparel. And we're based here in Connecticut on the East Coast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. It was a super pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts, or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.